Hello, welcome again to another exciting show of Community in Crisis. My name is Wayne Johnson. I'm a local attorney from Oakland, California. My co host is Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Today we have a special guest, uh, attorney Pamela Price. And Attorney Price is a well known California attorney whose offices are in Oakland, California, and she's won very many prestigious awards in the litigation area. She focuses primarily on employment discrimination. Hello, Pamela.
Hello, Wayne.
All right. In 2002, Pamela Price won a Clay Award, which is a California Lawyer of the Year award, and she continues to press forward in her legal challenges. Now, Ms. Price, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you went to school, and why you decided to become an attorney.
Okay. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, born in Dayton, raised in Cincinnati. And my father, mother are still there. My dad just passed. But I decided to become a lawyer because I wanted to change the world. My mother kept telling me as we grew up, you can't save the world. But she didn't say you couldn't change the world. So that's been my mission.
That's interesting. Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
I understand that you received an honor for being named one of the 9 most influential actors in Title IX history. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
By accident, I became someone who did change the world. Back in 1977, I joined the first sexual harassment lawsuit in education against Yale. No one would have foreseen that that case would actually change the law under Title IX and allow women who have been sexually harassed on college campuses across the country to sue for sexual harassment. I joined the case when it was a class action. There were 7 other people, and within a short period of time, the judge decided to dismiss everybody but me. And so I ended up being the poster child for the advance of the law. And so a few years ago, the ACLU looked back at the history of Title IX over the last 40 years and decided that my case was one of the things that actually changed the law in that area.
Now you were a plaintiff in that case,
I
right?
was the lead plaintiff. I
And
ended up being the only plaintiff.
and you had not gone to law school at that time.
No, I had not gone to law
Is that one
school.
of the reasons you decided to go to law school?
No, I started not to go to law school based on that experience. I ran from the law based on that experience.
Okay. Now, what inspired you to become a civil rights attorney?
Um, the people that I saw who were doing the law and making a difference and using the law to make a difference. While I was at Yale, I went to Yale as an undergraduate, and while I was there, I participated in a weekend called Organizing Weekend Attica for Life. We organized a series of seminars at the Yale Law School to address the Attica uprising, which at that time and still today was the largest prison uprising in this country. The lawyers that came from the front lines of that battle and came to the law school were so inspirational. Hayward Burns, Lennox Hines, Margaret Burnham. I mean, when they rode into the Yale Law School, it was phenomenal. And they were so intense and so committed to justice for the people that they represented that I was just totally blown away. And so that was my first inspiration, was seeing Black lawyers. Up until that point as well, I had not seen Black lawyers. I went to an all-Black high school in Cincinnati. I knew one Black lawyer. And I didn't know him that well, and I didn't respect him, quite frankly. But when these brothers and this sister showed up, and they were so intense and so committed and obviously so competent at what they were doing, it made a huge impression on me. Also, the fact that I was involved in Alexander versus Yale, that lawsuit, I got to work with lawyers who were pushing the law and literally writing the law at night and making new law. And I got to see how you could take the law and use it, change it to make it mean something for people and use it in that way. And so ultimately, I was able to be inspired to go forward on that basis.
Wow, what a history
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah.
Tell us, growing up, who were some of your role models?
Um, I I grew up obviously in a time of great civil rights turmoil. I was a child of the '60s. I came into my consciousness at that time. Angela Davis was a big role model and being concerned for her welfare and that whole struggle. Watching that, the most seminal moment for me in my history was the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and the rage that that moment just engendered, I think is, I know is still with me today.
Tell us who's are some of your role models today.
Well, fortunately, when I came to California to go to law school, I immediately attached myself to Howard Moore Jr. and got a chance to be mentored by him and tutored by him and to go to court with him and learn how to practice law at the highest level with Mr. Moore. And then later, I attached myself to John Burris and got a chance to work for him and to be mentored by him and also to learn how to be a good lawyer from him.
Thank you.
Pamela, you mentioned that you had experience at Attica.
Yes.
What I'd like to know is how would you explain the connection between the California Department of Corrections and the African American culture in, for instance, Oakland, California? What effect is the prison system having on African American culture?
Well, I think we all know that the pipeline to prison comes from our schools and from our communities directly into the California Department of Corrections as well as prisons. It's not just Oakland and it's not just California. This is part of the American experience. And in this second half of the 20th century, it became a defining element. Michelle Alexander has written a seminal text on the new Jim Crow and how that the criminal justice system is being used to disenfranchise black folks, people of color, Latinos, Asians, particularly African American men are being trapped into this system, tracked into it. When I grew up, there was tracking in school in terms of the educational system. That still exists, but on top of that now is this layer of tracking into the criminal justice system. And so the prison industrial complex, as we knew it in the '70s, has just ballooned and blossomed to
Do you
where it is today.
do you see a relationship between that and, for instance, Governor Jerry Brown's move to privatize some aspects of the California Department of Corrections?
I think that that is just another part of it. Yeah, it's just a new phase of it. The In California, the prisons just exploded. I mean, the number of institutions that were built throughout the state in the '80s and in the '90s was just an explosion. And so the correctional system essentially just took off. And to say now to take it into a private arena just adds a whole new level to it and another layer. That system is totally out of control. And as we know, the dollars that California spends are tax dollars that go into that prison industrial complex, just sucks the life out of the educational system, out of social services. And I think that even to the extent that people would say that the privatization of it is a way to somehow relieve that burden, that's not likely. Anytime you put the profit motive into something, particularly dealing with human beings, it's going to be detrimental. And it will just, I think, enforce the negative impact that the whole use of corrections and the correctional model has had on the community.
How might the City Council of Oakland approach this problem in the city then, given what you've said, so that we can begin to reverse some of the adverse effects that are occurring on families and, of course, the lives of individuals in the city of Oakland?
Well, I think the city knows, and those who are in power in the city well know how the California Department of Corrections has abused the city of Oakland, both in terms of the dumping of people back into the community with no resources, the dollars to provide jobs to people, to provide support to people coming back into the community has just not been there. And so Oakland has suffered tremendously under the state mandates dealing with corrections on a variety of different ways. My organization that I'm involved with, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, is now taking the leadership role in trying to help provide Alameda County with relocation services and reentry services. The focus has to be on acknowledging that people have been victimized and put into this system, and now we have to be prepared to deal with it as they come out. And the city council certainly has to take an active role in that.
You said relocation. What do you mean by relocation?
I mean, when people come in, they don't, when they release you from the Department of Corrections, they don't provide you with a place to stay. They don't provide you with the resources to get a place to stay. And so people are being dumped in, and it's the families or the churches that have to provide that safety net. And so to the extent that the city has the capacity to do that, that should be a fundamental program. People need housing, they need jobs, they need to be secure, and they need to not know that they have this thing hanging over them all the time. The abuses that take place within the parole system are just ridiculous. And so people need to be protected in that way.
But is that possible with the loss of the manufacturing infrastructure that used to flourish in the city of Oakland? I recall back in the 50s and 60s and 70s when there were many manufacturing jobs that absorbed unskilled laborers. Those manufacturing industries are gone. That infrastructure no longer exists. What can be done with the thousands and thousands of individuals who have been marginalized, as you say, by this system?
Well, I think that there have been other ways of developing other infrastructures. Other cities have done it. And certainly the city has the ability to go out and look at other situations, other communities where exactly that has happened. Oakland does not have to die. Like so many places, the city that I came from, Dayton, has died. And that's because people were not proactive about looking at exactly the situation that exists as you have described it and coming up with a solution for it. We have businesses in the city of Oakland. We have community organizations. We have opportunities that are just not being exploited.
Then why isn't it getting traction?
Well, that,
in your opinion,
in my opinion, I think it's easier for people to focus on backward strategies and to look back instead of looking forward. And it's easier to be willing to try to accommodate and just go along to get along, rather than to really say, I'm going to be the one that says, what does this community need? And it's very few people that are willing to do that.
Let me take a slight detour here. Let me go into some of your cases that you've done over your history of practicing law. Looking back over your 30-year career, what have been some of your most notable cases?
Well, some of the most notable ones have been the ones against the Department of Corrections. I started off in 1991 representing a female correctional officer out of San Quentin. I ended up doing a bunch of cases out of San Quentin. I did involving both females and male officers, a correctional counselor who wrote a favorable parole report for Geronimo Pratt. And they came after her because that was politically incorrect. And so it was my privilege and honor to represent her. From there, I went on to do more cases involving sexual harassment. CDC is my favorite defendant because they just don't get it. They write lots of paper, but they really don't know how to manage not only the people who are incarcerated there, but the people who work there. And they generally do a pretty good job of mistreating everybody. So I've been suing CDC for quite some time now and still have done a case most recently against them where the judge, we got an order where the judge ordered them that they had to set up a system, a procedure and a policy to protect women working within the institutions who were being sexually harassed in ways that were just ridiculous and that was causing their careers to be cut short. And so that has had a major impact on the department. I think that people have to be willing to sue CDC from every angle to try to change that. In the city of Oakland, we've done a number of cases. One of them, which was quite memorable, was the Grundy case, where Chance Grundy was killed in North Oakland because he witnessed a murder and because he was willing to cooperate with the police and identify the person who killed the other person. And so that case was important because we discovered there that Oakland did not have any real type of victim witness protection program. You know, you see it on the movies, but if it became clear to us that if you witnessed a crime in the city of Oakland and you talked about it, you were taking your life into your hands. And that was a very dangerous kind of precedent because police can only solve crimes if they have the cooperation of the community. And they're always asking for cooperation. But if you want people to help you, then you have to be prepared to protect them.
Well, along that line, I mean, the Oakland police, they seem to have their own problems with violating the law at times as well.
Constantly. One of the cases we did a couple years ago was the Mestis case. And I got a chance to examine the inner workings of the Oakland Police Department at that time, and it was a completely dysfunctional organization. And we called 3 of the previous police chiefs to testify at that trial. And clearly, these men were not thinking forwardly. They just were thinking about their own positions, and they weren't into working with people. They didn't have any solutions, and the department was just a cesspool of just people just out of control.
Do you have any recommendations for things you could do to maybe put the police force on this right foot? I know they have this consent decree that's in effect from the Ryder's case, but
right.
Can you think of anything else that we might be able to do?
Well, I think the Monitor is doing a lot to try to bring them, you know, into the new world here and to hold them accountable in ways that they've never been held accountable before. And so I think that the community has to support that effort of the Monitor. We have to have oversight and we have to have accountability within our police department. And certainly the relationship between the city council and the police department has to get improved.
Pamela, I'm very concerned with the fact I just read a report that only 28% of homicide cases get closed. I'm concerned. What about the 72% of the homicide cases that don't get closed? Does that mean that killers can come to Oakland and kill and expect that there's a 72% chance that they're going to get away? Are we inviting psychotic killers into our city that may find it as a playground for them?
I hate to tell you this, but we have psychotic killers in our city. You know, one of the real dangers that we have certainly in the African American community and throughout Oakland is that there is a level of lawlessness that is bred by police ineptitude, by the fact that people know exactly what you know. I don't need to worry about who I kill or how many people I kill because I'm not going to get caught. And I'm not going to get caught because the police are not going to do their job. They're not going to follow up. They're not going to investigate correctly. They're not going to hold themselves accountable. And so they don't have the ability to hold me accountable. It is already true that there are times in the city of Oakland when people who want to commit crimes simply monitor what the police are doing and where they're actually deployed, and then they go and do the crime.
Let me ask you this. In line with the former Ryder's case, I mean, it looks like the police were doing crime. They were actually taking money from the criminals and supposedly doing that and beating criminals and so forth. What kind of impact does that have on a person's mentality?
Well, certainly it creates a division within the department. Unfortunately, within almost every major police department, you're going to have some element of that. You have people who are overzealous. And it's in Oakland, it's endemic because of the lack of accountability. The Ryders were able to flourish because for years you had a climate within the department that internal affairs, and unfortunately it's true in a lot of departments, there's an internal affairs department where the police are supposed to police themselves, but they don't do it. And so the reality was, and to some extent still is, it's less now because we do have the Monitor, but in many departments, the internal affairs department is just a rubber stamp for whatever misconduct has actually occurred. And there's a mentality that the community is not to be really to be protected or respected, but is simply there to allow the police, fundamentally to be police.
Isn't it also true that some of these guys were falsifying timesheets and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah.
All right, so,
Yeah.
so in essence, some of these guys were just as bad as the criminals out
Well,
there.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. In many departments, you will have an element of people who don't actually respect the law, but they are there for the power. We give police power, both psychologically, physically, and some people will gravitate to that. They're not there to protect and serve the community. They're there to develop their own power.
Isn't it also true that some people who are accused of misconduct will also later become members of the internal affairs?
Oh yes. Oh yes. This is you have to be able to hold the entire department accountable. And Oakland has the problems in Oakland go back to long before I got here. I mean, the kind of corruption and um, incestuous relationships, shall we say, that spawned the riders had been long-standing. We've seen a great deal of improvement since the riders, and it's continuing to improve. The recent leadership changes can only be viewed as an improvement in where we've been.
Pamela, hypothetically,
Yes.
1,000 mothers who have lost sons, victims to homicide, come to you. And they say, Attorney Price, we heard you on Community in Crises. What can we do with you and others like you to impress upon the city council that change must take place now? What would you say to them?
I would say to them, God bless you, number one, because if you're 1,000 strong, that means somebody has already done the organizing. As a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer, one of the things that I learned early from my mentors was that no matter who I sued, I could not have the kind of impact that the community as organized as a force could have. And so 1,000 mothers, they don't need a lawyer, okay? They have the ability to go to the city council. They have the ability to organize another 1,000 people. We were talking earlier about, before the show, about the Black church. One of the crises in our community is the apathy within our churches, and the fact that there are very few churches that are taking a stand against the gun violence, against the terrorists who are already here, that are killing themselves and killing us. And so it's very important that the community take a role, and 1,000 mothers would just be just a watershed moment for Oakland.
Now, Pamela, I said that also to impress upon our viewers this statistical fact that if you take the over 4,500 citizens who have been murdered in Oakland since 1969, and you do the math, each one of them having had two parents, each parent having had two parents, sisters and brothers and cousins and second cousins and friends, the numbers of people in our city who are depressed, who are in mourning continually, goes into the 30+ thousand. We are a city on the precipice. And I think that number, that 1,000 mothers, who I hope do call you, hear this and can mobilize to make a change in the city.
Let me ask you this. What advice would you have for young people who are thinking about careers in Oakland? What would you tell them today? Having gone to law school, what would you, if you were 20 years old today or 18 years old today, what would you do?
Become a civil rights lawyer. And I would tell them, get a law degree. Because when you think about it, the law touches every aspect of our lives. And at some point in your life, you're going to have contact with the law. And you're either going to need a lawyer or somebody in your life is going to need a lawyer. And so to understand your rights and to understand the law as a lawyer has to understand it. We appreciate how difficult and challenging it is to get justice in our judicial system, and how persistent you have to be, and how strong you have to be. And so, for a young person, I would say don't give up on your dreams. You need to try to get your education. You need to continue to seek out wisdom from your elders, and you just have to hang in there. I know that people prayed for me. And when I couldn't pray for myself, somebody else was praying for me, and that got me through.
I want to thank you very much, Pamela Price, for being our guest. Been very impressive. That has been another episode of Community in Crisis. Thank you very much. If you need to contact us, you can look for us on YouTube, look for us on Channel 27.
And you can get us on earthcolony.net. That's earthcolony.net. Thank you.